Welcome to Saroca Speaks, the podcast for human-centered leaders and those looking to deepen their personal development. We're so happy to have you here, and we hope that you enjoy this episode.
What's up, everyone? We're ready and we're back. This is the latest episode of Saroca Speaks. I'm joined today by my beautiful co-host.
It's Claire.
And my name is Emily, and we are here to bring you the second pillar of the Saroca Index, which is alignment. The Saroca Index is 6 pillars with which we measure optimization in the workplace. Our second pillar is alignment. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what alignment in the workplace looks like. Claire, tell us your perspective.
I love this one because when we think about alignment, we always think about, are we in alignment with ourselves, right? That's the first go-to. How are we showing up? How do we feel? Are we being genuine? Are we being authentic? But like you say, it's so much more than that. Particularly when it comes to leadership, particularly when it comes to being an employee of a business, being an entrepreneur perhaps of a business. And what does it mean to be in alignment with the work that we do and how we show up? And I think I'm going to pass back to you because I really want us to talk about more of the zones of flow, which we absolutely love and we bring into so much of our teachings at Saroca. So can you explain a little bit more to the listeners about what the zones of flow are?
Sure. And we use zones of flow to measure alignment because what we know is if an individual or an organization isn't in alignment, performance inevitably suffers. So if you think about, right people, right roles, or wrong people in the wrong roles, inevitably that's going to hinder performance. Collaboration is going to stall. People are going to make more mistakes. They're going to be less happy, more stress, higher risk of burnout. And we know that when people are operating in alignment, they experience greater collaboration, reduced stress, and essentially, as you mentioned, really more flow. So we like to use Gay-Hendricks zones of flow, which are measured in 4 different domains. We might suggest that the zone of incompetence is the stuff that you're not good at and you don't really enjoy doing it, and pretty much everybody else can do it. Then we've got the zone of competence. This is the stuff that you're good at, but you don't really enjoy doing it, and a lot of other people can also do it. Then you've got your zone of excellence. This is the stuff that you're really good at and you enjoy it. Fewer people can do it, but it's not necessarily exclusive to you. But the thing about zone of excellence is that there is no challenge. So when people operate too long in the zone of excellence, they will get bored. They'll create redundancies. They will have lower levels of engagement. So ideally what we're after, and really what our philosophy at Saroca is as leaders, those that are managing people and cultivating and curating teams, we really have the opportunity to create environments where people get to access their zone of genius every day. And the zone of genius is the things that you're good at and you enjoy doing it. And there's a healthy dose of friction or challenge that keeps you engaged. And there are very few people that can do what you're doing in your zone of genius the way that you can do it. So ideally, in an optimized workplace, we've got people operating in alignment, which means they're spending predominantly the majority of their time in their zone of genius and excellence. They'll kind of waver between the two. And it's safe to say that most of us will have aspects of our role that do fall into zone of competence or incompetence. But the key to alignment and optimized performance is that we don't want to spend the majority of our time in those areas. We know that if people are spending more than half their time in the zone of incompetence or the zone of competence, they are more at higher risk for burnout, more stressed, and, what we might just simply say is not operating in alignment. So that's one of the measurement tools, essentially, that we use when we talk about alignment in the workplace.
And I think what's really important for leaders is to look at this, and we can do this. You can do this as an exercise within your department and even within yourself, is to really do a quadrant and divide divide each quarter into one of those sections. So the incompetence, competence, excellence, and genius, and really sit and look at the work that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and put it into one of those boxes and really look at where you may be operating in the excellence and genius, which is where you want to be operating at the majority of the time, and how much of your work is in the incompetence and competence. And if there is too much of that work on that lower half, then what can be done to reassign that, delegate, reassess, priorities perhaps. Maybe there's some things you can't offload and they are generally part of your job. And it's just looking at, okay, well, how do I move that into, I always think about moving that into maybe the excellence, right? Because maybe it's something that you're not trained on or you don't have enough knowledge on. So it's how can you make that situation better if there is no way of delegating that part of the work?
Yeah, I think the other point that you bring up there is it can be very powerful to do this exercise in group where people are willing, because I have seen so many times fostering different departments, different group coaching programs where we bring in the zones of flow and somebody will, think about a task or an initiative or within a project, something that needs to be completed. And they're like, oh, I'm really dragging my feet on this. This is totally my zone of competence or incompetence. And someone else is like, that's totally my excellence or that's totally my genius. Let me take that off of your plate. So this is also a way where we can organize and align collaboratively the team and as an organization in this.
Yeah. And I think it's really important as well to look at, and I'm going to come back to being a leader, but to look at your team as well. And perhaps where you will see the signs of being out of alignment. And I know that you touched on, the stress and the burnout, but look for other warning signs. Are they showing up late? Are they standing up, in the kitchen, bitching and moaning and complaining about their work? Are they missing deadlines? Is there mistakes, a ton of mistakes in their work? And it's really looking at that through the lens of, are they in alignment with their work? And where is this work falling? Then let's look at how do we overcome those barriers that they have. Is it the training? Is it their confidence around a particular task? Maybe they feel like they're just not great at it, or maybe it's an expectation. They don't know what is expected to be delivered because they've never done it before, or it comes back with just mistakes, but no real clear guidance on what needs to be done.
I think that's a part of the role of a leader and manager is, are we clearly communicating what ideal success looks like within a given project, task, or even the organization's mission? You can look at this from an organizational standpoint too, in terms of alignment, right? Where whatever product or service you're offering, how well does that fit into the industries that you serve, to the verticals that you serve? How much is there a gap in the market for which you fill? And if that's not happening or you're noticing challenge or friction, we might say that the organization itself is out of alignment. And this is where I think a lot of founders have an opportunity to create pivots in whatever their initial, product market fit was or whatever their go-to-market strategy was, and really think a little bit about, are they willing to pivot? Are they willing to adapt to what the market is asking of them? Do they have the skills and the competency to provide, such an offering? And what will be required of them, the team, and thus the product or the offering to move into greater alignment? Because my experience is that as individuals and as organizations, when we're in alignment, I'm not saying things are easy, but man, do they flow a lot better, right? And actually the fact when things are flowing and going well, that's like a good indicator and a good affirmation that you are in alignment, right? And maybe where you hit some bumps in the road, you got to pivot, you have to adjust a little bit, course correct in that sense. And this happens on a macro scale with an organization within a specific industry or how they are showing up in the market, and on a micro scale of who individuals are within their roles and the role that they play within the organization and whether or not that's truly a fit.
I think that's really important, isn't it, as well? Like you say, if the company needs to pivot and they need to make changes, if there's a gap in the market that they've spotted, it's coming back to, is the team also on board and back in alignment. And I wonder if we can weave in a little bit of the culture as well, right? Are we creating a culture that is, I don't want to say inclusive because I don't mean it like that, but that has everybody in alignment, that everyone is on board with the culture and the values of the business, and they understand when the C-suite come in and the owners and the board are making changes or are growing the product base, that everybody understands, and that is communicated in such an effective way that it's like, yeah, the team have got this. They know exactly, and we're all now pulling in the same direction. Whereas there's, if you're not communicating that effectively enough, you've got those at the back of the ship rowing in the opposite direction, right? With the front keep going, and they're kind of resistant because they're not in alignment. They don't fully understand the change. So I think that's an important one to think about as well.
Yeah, a good assessment there is I like to categorize employees into 3 different categories: engaged, disengaged, and actively disengaged. And if you are noticing significant levels of disengagement, or worse, actively disengaged, which means people are going out of their way to make things more difficult for other people, to throw stones, to throw mud, to ask unnecessary questions, to waste time, to waste resources. But we got to get those people out of our organizations as fast as possible. Disengaged is an interesting one because, you as a leader have the task of showing up and cultivating your relationship with that individual through a situational leadership lens in terms of what it might require or take to get them back into the engaged camp. And the engaged camp of employees kind of speaks for itself. These are the people, your high potentials, the ones that you can count on, rely on, the ones you can delegate to, and essentially the ones that are really driving the organization forward. So it can be helpful to look at, your team. Is my team in alignment? Well, let me put people into the category. Is Sue, actively disengaged, engaged, or disengaged, actively disengaged, or engaged? Is Bob, in what category does Bob, Steve, Charlotte, all these, from the individual lens.
Yeah. And I think that's where you have to look at the hierarchy of the business, right? And you have to look at, you might have the CEO and then the team leads or the directors, and it may just be one division as well. So it may not be the entire company. It may not be one person. It's also worth looking at the different departments because there's so many subcultures within a business that operate, and particularly for companies that are international, right? There's that disengagement potentially between offices even, or there's not so much collaboration. And there's really some teachings that we do around this and some education around, how do we show up? How do we create an environment that breeds that great communication, that allows that safe space, that builds psychologically safe environments for people to show up and be their authentic self, be, in alignment with the business, but also within the team and within themselves, and to see then where is that falling down. I think that's where you can even look one level up, right? From Sue and Bob, and on the individual, it's like, okay, well, I'm noticing something within this specific team or this specific location of office as well.
Well, that's what the Saroca Index is all about. It is a way for you to be able to assess through either an individual perspective or an organizational perspective 6 different pillars that will inevitably assess the level of optimization and alignment that you have in your organization. And the 6 pillars are safety, alignment, resilience, optimization, and accountability. So stay tuned for further episodes as we continue to dive into the Saroca Index throughout the year. Our beta is coming in March for the actual assessment. Saroca is developing our first product. We're so excited, in addition to our epic world-class services, of course. So we really thank you so much for being here today, joining us on this journey of alignment as it relates to the Saroca Index and you optimizing humanity in the workplace. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next time. Ciao for now.
You've been listening to Saroca Speaks. Thank you so much for being here. You can catch us twice a month on the podcast to keep learning about how you can deepen your human-centered leadership and personal development. We'll see you next time.